It started quietly, the way most life-changing moments do, without warning, without drama, without anyone announcing that something irreversible had just begun. I'm a single father in my early 40s, working a regular job, living a routine life built around responsibility. My world revolved around my son, school runs, packed lunches, parent-teacher meetings, and late nights helping with homework. After my divorce, I had learned how to live on autopilot. No expectations, no risks, just stability. I told myself that was enough. Every Saturday afternoon, I dropped my son off at football practice. The parents usually stood around the field, scrolling through their phones, exchanging polite nods, but little conversation. That's where I first noticed her. Not because she was loud or dramatic, but because she wasn't. She stood confidently, sunglasses resting on her head, watching the kids play like she actually enjoyed being there. Her son and mine became friends quickly. Playdates followed, school projects, birthday invitations. And just like that, our paths crossed more often than I expected. Tea first, our conversations were harmless. Small talk, complaints about traffic, laughing about how fast kids grow up. She had an easy smile, the kind that made conversations feel lighter than they should. I didn't think much of it. I wasn't looking for anything. I hadn't been for years. Then the tone shifted, subtly. She started finding reasons to stand closer when we talked. Her texts became more frequent, less about the kids and more about everyday things. She'd compliment me in passing. My patience with my son, my sense of humor, the way I handled things calmly. Compliments I hadn't heard in a long time. Point one evening, while waiting for the boys to finish practice, she laughed at something I said and touched my arm, briefly, naturally, but intentionally. I felt it immediately. Not just the touch, but what it meant. That I remember driving home that night with my hands tied on the steering wheel, try to convince myself I was imagining things. I told myself she was just friendly, that I was overthinking, that I was too old for this kind of distraction. But deep down, I knew something had changed. It wasn't desire that scared me. It was awakening. For years, I had lived quietly, responsibly, predictably. And suddenly, without planning it, without asking for it, I felt seen again. Not as a father, not as a provider, but as a man. That night, my phone buzzed out a message from her. Today was nice. We should talk more, just us. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. That was the moment my era truly began. Though I didn't understand it yet, that I didn't reply right away, that I read her message again and again, letting the words sink in, weighing them against everything I'd built my life around. My son, my responsibilities, the quiet rules I'd set for myself after my divorce. It felt safer not to respond, as if silence could undo the spark that had already been lit. But silence doesn't erase curiosity. The next morning, her name was still there on my screen. No follow-up message. No pressure. Just that single line waiting for an answer. I finally replied with something simple, careful, almost professional. Was, hope the boys had fun. She responded within minutes. Not pushy, not obvious, just warm, effortless. Over the next few days, our conversations grew longer. They slipped out of the safe territory of school schedules and homework into stories about work, past mistakes, and small dreams we'd both quietly abandoned. She talked about her marriage like it was something that had ended long before the paperwork did. I talked about loneliness without ever using the word. Point one afternoon, she suggested we grab coffee while the kids were at practice. Nothing complicated, she said. Just coffee. I agreed, telling myself that adults were allowed to talk. That this didn't mean anything. The cafe was only a few minutes from the field, but it felt like stepping into a different world. Without the noise of kids and the excuse of parenting, we were just two people sitting across from each other. She looked at me when I spoke, really looked. She laughed easily. She listened to one point. She leaned forward and said, you don't act like someone who's given up on life. That sentence stayed with me, that I had given up on parts of myself. I just hadn't realized it until she said it out loud. When we walked back to the field, she didn't rush away. She matched my pace. Our shoulders brushed, and neither of us moved aside. No words were needed. The tension said everything. That night, I lay awake longer than usual, replaying the afternoon in my head. The way she smiled, The way she spoke my name. The way being around her made me feel present again, that I knew this was no longer harmless. And what unsettled me most wasn't the risk. It was how much I want to take it. From that point on, it became impossible to pretend nothing was happening. Our messages started earlier in the day and ended much later at night. They weren't flirtatious in the obvious sense, but they carried weight. Long pauses between replies, words chosen carefully, emotions hinted at rather than spoken. It felt intimate without crossing any visible line, which somehow made it more intense. She began sharing pieces of herself she hadn't shown anyone in years. How she felt invisible in her own home. How conversations in her marriage had turned into silence, then obligation. I listened, not trying to fix anything, just being there. She told me there was rare point one evening. After practice, the boys asked if they could walk to the nearby store together. It was safe, familiar territory. We watched them disappear down the street, laughing, and suddenly we were alone, with no reason to pretend otherwise. She looked at me differently then. Not playful, not casual, honest. "I don't usually do this," she said quietly. "But talking to you feels easy." I nodded because anything I said would have revealed too much. The truth was, I felt the same. Around her, I wasn't guarded. I wasn't the man who had been hurt and learned to shut things down. I was just myself, that we stood there longer than necessary, the space between us shrinking naturally. I could smell her perfume, subtle, warm. She didn't move away. Neither did I. Nothing happened. No touch, no kiss. And yet, when we finally stepped back, it felt like we'd crossed something invisible. After that night, restraint became harder. Every interaction carried memory and anticipation. I found myself checking my phone more often, smiling without realizing it. Even my son noticed I seemed lighter, more present. But with the excitement came guilt that I started questioning my intentions. Was I being selfish? Was I risking stability for a feeling? I told myself I was still in control, that as long as nothing physical happened, everything was fine. Then she sent me a message late one night. I keep thinking about that moment when it was just us. I stared at the words, my heart racing, because I was thinking about it too, and I knew with unsettling clarity that whatever this was, it was no longer something I could walk away from easily. After that message, the balance I had been pretending to maintain finally cracked. That I replied honestly for the first time. Not dramatically, not impulsively, just the truth. Me too. There was no taking it back after that, though we didn't rush into anything. But the energy between us changed completely. Every conversation carried intention now. Every pause meant something. When we met at practice, our eyes searched for each other before anything else. We were careful in public, measured in our movements, but the connection was unmistakable. Point one afternoon, she asked if I could help her carry some boxes into her car. The parking lot was nearly empty. As we loaded the last box, she thanked me and lingered longer than necessary. Then she looked up at me, her expression serious. "I don't want to do something wrong," she said, "but I also don't want to pretend this isn't real." I felt the same war inside me. Responsibility versus honesty. Fear versus desire. That we agreed to meet later that evening. Just to talk, we told ourselves. No kids, no distractions, just clarity. She chose a quiet place, away from familiar faces. When she arrived, she looked different, more vulnerable, less guarded. The conversation started cautiously, but emotions don't stay contained for long. Words turned into confessions. Confessions turned into silence. T1 point. She reached across the table and held my hand. The touch was gentle, but it carried weeks of unspoken tension. I didn't pull away. Instead, I realized something important in that moment. I wasn't chasing excitement. I was responding to connection. When we finally stood to leave, the night air felt heavy. We walked side by side, neither of us speaking. Then she stopped. "I need to know," she said softly. "If this goes further, you won't disappear." I looked at her, really looked at her. Not as someone's mother, not as a risk, but as a woman who had seen me when I didn't even see myself. "I'm not running," I said. She leaned in first. The kiss was slow, deliberate, almost hesitant, like we both understood the weight of it. When we pulled apart, everything felt different. Not reckless, Not forbidden, just real. Driving home that night, I knew there was no turning back. This wasn't a moment anymore. IT was the beginning of something that would demand choices and consequences. The days after that night felt unreal, like I was living two lives at once that on the surface, everything looked the same. Mornings were still about school bags and breakfast. Work remained busy and predictable. I laughed with my son, helped him with homework, listened to his stories. But underneath it all, there was a quiet current pulling at me. Every thought eventually leading back to her that we agreed to take things slowly. No sudden changes. No quieres mistakes. What we shared felt too important to rush. Still, restraint only made the connection stronger. Our messages became fewer but deeper, more intentional. When we met, even briefly, there was an understanding between us that didn't need words. Point one evening, she told me the truth about her marriage. Not in anger, not with blame, but with exhaustion. She said she had stayed too long for the sake of routine, for appearances, for her child. Listening to her, I recognized parts of myself in her story. Two people who had learned how to survive, but forgot how to live. The weight of reality began to press in. People notice changes, even when you think you're being careful. A friend asked why I seemed happier. My son once smiled at me and said, "You laugh more now." The comment stayed with me longer than it should have. It reminded me that every choice I made affected more than just me. There were moments of doubt, late nights when I questioned whether this was courage or selfishness, whether I was rebuilding my life or risking the peace I had worked so hard to create. But every time we talked face to face, those doubts softened. With her, I felt honest, grounded, present. Then came a conversation we had both been avoiding. She told me she was thinking seriously about change, not because of me, but because she couldn't keep living halfway. She didn't ask me for promises. She didn't demand anything. She just wanted to know if what we shared was real enough to face the truth that I told her it was. That answer scared me more than anything else I had said in years. Because once you admit something is real, you can't hide behind excuses anymore. And I knew the next step wouldn't be quiet or easy. That IT would redefine everything for both of us. The change didn't happen all at once. It arrived in small, heavy moments that forced honesty where comfort used to live. She told her husband first. Not dramatically, not with accusations, just the truth that she had been unhappy for a long time, that staying had begun to feel like a slow kind of disappearing. It wasn't about me, she made that clear, but I knew my presence had given her the courage to stop lying to herself. When she told me it was done, I didn't feel relief. I felt responsibility that we didn't rush into being public. We waited. We let time pass. We allowed wounds to settle. During that period, I questioned myself more than ever. I asked whether this connection could survive reality, not just secrecy and emotion. What surprised me was how normal it felt once we stopped hiding, that we started with simple things. Coffee without watching the door, conversations that didn't end in hesitation, laughter that wasn't followed by guilt. Slowly, carefully, we allowed our worlds to overlap. Our sons, unaware of the complexity behind it all, remained just friends at first. And that mattered. We protected them from adult complications as long as we could point. One night, after the kids were asleep, she sat beside me and rested her head on my shoulder. There was no rush, no intensity, just peace. That was when I understood something important. This wasn't about desire. IT was about alignment. Point two, people who had been walking separate paths of endurance had finally stepped into something honest, something chosen. Months later, when people asked how it started, I never knew how to answer. There was no dramatic beginning, no reckless decision, just a moment when I stopped shrinking myself. And she did the same. Why era didn't begin with confidence or control. That IT began when I allowed myself to be seen again. And for the first time in years, that felt like freedom.